my name is Jordan Weaver, and this is my video outreach project. I did mine on the physiology of schizophrenia. I recently had a family member who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, so this is a very important topic that I'm very emotionally interested in. So let's get started. The physiology of schizophrenia. What is schizophrenia? Schizophrenia is a neuropsychological disorder characterized by psychosis, hallucinations, delusions, illogical thinking, abnormal or repetitive muscle movements, and difficulty regulating emotions. People with schizophrenic disorders may also have cyclic manic depressive episodes. Theories of the cause of schizophrenic disorders include genetic components and neural pathway dysregulations. To understand the physiology of schizophrenia, we first need to understand what a neurotransmitter is. Neurotransmitters are how neurons, which are brain cells, communicate. They are chemical messengers that send information from one neuron to another or several others. They create various signaling cascades, which are responses, in the receiving neurons that varies depending on which neurotransmitter is released. The receiving neuron has receptors for neurotransmitters, which is how they read the message. Which neurotransmitters are affected in schizophrenic disorders? Dopamine. This neurotransmitter plays a role in memory, learning, and motor control. It's made by neurons in the ventral midbrain. Serotonin, which plays a role in regulating decision-making and mood, is made by neurons in the brainstem. Glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter, means it stimulates processes. Its most important function is in brain development. And acetylcholine, which plays a role in memory, learning, and behavior. It's made by neurons in the forebrain. One of the first pathways that are affected is the dopamine pathway. Some theories suggest that too much dopamine is made in individuals with schizophrenic disorders. When too much dopamine is made, the receptors in the receiving brain cells become less sensitive to it, and fewer receptors are present. When the receiving brain cells are unable to process the dopamine coming their way, it affects the processes that dopamine controls. It's theorized that this dysfunction leads to the negative symptoms of schizophrenic disorders, which include fatigue and forgetfulness, as well as disordered muscle movements. In the glutamate pathway, it's theorized that glutamate levels are also increased. Similar to the dopamine pathway disruption, the receiving cells may not process glutamate correctly, which leads to oversynthesis of glutamate. One possible reason for this is decreased protein kinase in the receiving cells. This protein is responsible for creating the signaling cascade inside the receiving brain cell. When this activity is inhibited, the message is never fully sent to the receiving brain cell, resulting in glutamate being continually made and sent to this neuron to try to send the message. This dysfunction leads to the increase in dopamine because glutamate stimulates dopamine synthesis. In the serotonin pathway, increased stimulation and secretion of serotonin may be what leads to protein kinase C inactivity in glutamate receiving cells. Serotonin receptors on the receiving cell removes phospholipids from the cell's membrane. The increased level of serotonin eventually leads to metabolic disruption, which is hypometabolism, in these cells. The frontal lobe of the brain is responsible for controlling emotions and decision-making, and it's heavily innervated by serotonergic cells. Because of the serotonin-induced hypometabolism in this area of the brain, messages are not sent frequently, and eventually the areas that the message are sent, called synapses, begin to die. Because the frontal lobe cannot effectively communicate, emotional control and decision-making is negatively affected. In the acetylcholine pathway, cholinergic receptors are thought to be dysfunctional in individuals with schizophrenic disorders, especially in the cerebral cortex. The cerebral cortex regulates thinking, memory, and sensory functions. Symptoms such as hallucinations and delusions may come about because acetylcholine is unable to send correct messages through the cerebral cortex due to dysfunctional receptors. How can we support loved ones with schizophrenic disorders? Having a strong support network has been shown to increase schizophrenic individuals' willingness to participate in talk therapy and pharmacological treatment. It's incredibly important to show compassion and empathy to individuals with schizophrenic disorders. These disorders can lead to reluctance to participate in social activities, which in turn can worsen certain symptoms. When you love someone with a mental illness, it can be difficult, but showing support for them can change their world.